Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaign review, this time covering Wulfrik the Wanderer. Now before we get into the guts of the review, I just want to let you guys know that we're doing a promo with Games Planet, where if you click on the link in the description or the pinned comment, it takes you to Games Planet, where you've got a chance to win one of 5 $25 vouchers on the website. And they've still got the 19% off for the Chaos Dwarf DLC. I don't get any commission for any of it, not getting paid for any of this. It's entirely something that is there to benefit you guys. I'm getting nothing out of it. Hopefully it helps you guys. It's up to you if you want to click on it or not. So, let's talk about Wulfrik the Wanderer. He starts off at Monolith of Bjorkul Bloody Hand, which is not the same start position he had in Warhammer 2 and 1. He used to start down here. I think that this is actually a much better start position because in Warhammer 1 and 2, you sort of waited around for the scalings to come at you. It was difficult to get an attack early on, whereas you've got a fight here right from the get-go, and this is a faction leader, so beating him will allow you to confederate the Bjornlings, and then you just want to immediately go after the Naglfirelings, another faction that you start off at war with. Now, these guys here are once again a bitchy faction where they'll wait until they've got a full stack before they'll come at you, and they can recruit a bit faster than you, so you do want to get them to come at you early. Now, this isn't a guaranteed strategy, because sometimes the verge, like Surtha Ek, will come in and fight them first, so it's like 50-50 chances of work. But if you recruit another lord on turn 1 and have Wulfrik from turn 2 go into ambush stance instead of recruit, and have the other lord do the recruiting for you, there's a chance that this lord here will come at you to try to fight that lord because he seems significantly weaker, and you can use that opportunity with Wulfrik hidden to launch the attack on him early before he's built up a full stack, and that way you can confederate him rather than having to capture every settlement, and then you can just get a more aggressive campaign going on. Now, once you've beaten the Naglfirelings, you then need to question whether or not to go and fight the Varg or the Scaling. Both of them will declare war on you at some point. It's kind of difficult to do any sort of diplomacy with Norskins, even when you're playing as Norska, because everyone hates you, including Norskins. So you just need to make a judgment call. I usually go after the Scaling first, because they tend to declare war on me first. And once you've done that, then you've got Nordland down here, who once again declare war on you. But these guys here tend to be a bit skittish about actually sending armies over this way. Overall, I think that Wulfrik's got a much easier time than he did in Total War Warhammer 1 and 2, especially on the higher difficulties. But it really benefits from having an aggressive playstyle. You want to hit the ground running and not sit around total. Recruit as much as possible and just hit these guys as fast as you can. And try to not get the entirety of Norska, but just get maybe about half of it. There's also the opportunity to confederate Throg. I usually wait a little bit for Throg to gain a little bit of territory before I do it. That way when I beat his ass, I get the whole lot of his territory. But it's also possible that he'll just declare war on you early. It's hard to say. Alright, now let's talk about Wulfrik the Wanderer himself. I feel like Wulfrik himself is no longer a 10 out of 10 legendary lord, because he was essential for the Norskins on higher difficulties in Warhammer 2 because of everything he provided. He was boosting their best units, he provided public order globally. He was just an excellent legendary lord. Now the thing is, it's not that he doesn't do those things anymore, it's just that you don't need it as much anymore, so he just doesn't feel like a 10 out of 10 anymore. So if we have a look at him, his trait over here gives you Born Warrior, which is a reinforcement range plus 30% for Lord's Army. And what that means is that you don't have to be right up against the red circle around an enemy army for him to reinforce. I don't think that's hugely impactful though. And his entire army gets the attribute Causes Fear, which that's good, especially if you're using early game units. If you're rolling around with Mammoths, they have Fear by default, so it's not really going to make any difference. But for Marauders, that's pretty good. And Wulfrik himself no longer boosts Mammoths, it's his faction that boosts it. So his sort of designated Doom stack is actually Marauders now, but it's entirely up to you which way you want to go. You totally can still go Mammoths. He's got the ability Seafang right from the get-go, which gives you 3 uses that don't cost Winds of Magic of a fairly powerful wind attack. It's pretty good in the early game for causing if you can get a blob going on enemy forces and just ripping right through them, you can get hundreds of kills with this per cast. And you've got Hunter of Champions over here. So this is his dueling skill, where pop this down on an enemy lord or hero, they lose 30 armor, 40 melee defense, and 45 speed for 24 seconds. It's good for getting an advantage over them in combat. Then you got Juggernauts of the Soul, which gives you Worm Piercer ammunition, improved anti-large for all javelin units, and bonus versus large for Marauder Hunters. This is in melee, Marauder Spearmen, and all Marauder Cavalry units. So for the Marauder Spearmen, they'll just get more anti-large. Then you've got World Walker over here, which gives you 2 additional uses of Sea Fang, campaign movement range plus 10%, and immune to all sea-based attrition, which is pretty good because that Sea Fang ability is useful throughout the entire campaign, and you're always going to want more campaign movement range. Also, another thing, contrary to what the game tells you, an army-based campaign movement range cannot be increased by more than 50%. That is actually 100% bullcrap. I don't know why that's even in there. You absolutely can. Discard this information entirely. It is a complete and utter lie. You can increase your campaign movement range without limitations as long as you can actually find these abilities. Then you've got Gift of Tongues over here, which gives Wulfrik himself the attribute Terror and enemy leadership -5 local region. Now, I think that giving him Terror is not particularly useful, especially if you end up on a War Mammoth mount, since it has what's it called? Terror by default, so it just won't mean anything at that point. Then Echoes of Ambition reduces the upkeep cost of the Lord's Army by 15%. So with that, you have no designated unit that's going to be super cheap in your army. Although if you combine that with your faction effects, you can get very cheap Marauders. Then you've got construction cost -33% for province capitals and settlement buildings, which is good, and construction time -2 for province capitals and settlement buildings. Then you've got Eternal Challenger over here for casualty replenishment rate plus 50% for this lord, which is actually the cap. There is a cap for replenishment. It cannot go above 50%, but sometimes it helps to get more than 50% in case you end up in a red territory. Although for the Norskins, the only red territory is actually the Galleon's Graveyard. So there's very few regions where that the Norskins find unpleasant. Whereas, in Total War Warhammer 2, for example, they couldn't occupy half the settlements. Actually, 90% of the settlements in the game. Then you've got an upgrade for the Hunter of Champions ability, which just makes it so they can't move instead of just slow them down by 45%. And then you've got Perfect Vigor here, which is actually pretty easy to get with the Campaigner trait, since you tend to move away from your capital fairly early on. But having that earlier is definitely not a bad thing. Overall, I think his unique skill line doesn't feel super impactful, at least compared to what it used to be like, but it's still okay. And he's also got down here Devourers of Flesh, which is unique to him. The other generic lords don't get it, which increases the recruit rank for Skin Wolves by 5 in the local province. So he has to actually be there for them to be recruited at that rank, and increases their capacity by 1. Now, if we have a look at his items, he still only has the Sword of Torgald, and this is the item that I was talking about before that was basically essential for high difficulty play in Warhammer 2 for Norska, because in Warhammer 2, if you didn't have that much chaos corruption in a province, you would suffer up to -20 public order problems, whereas in Warhammer 3, you don't suffer any public order problems from not having chaos corruption. You just gain benefits to having chaos corruption. So you don't really need this control as much as you did before. It's still good, don't get me wrong, but you're not going to suffer just every one of your non-chaos corrupted provinces constantly revolting like you did in Total Warhammer 2, unless you had that. Then you've got income from post-battle loot plus 10%, melee attack plus 10, weapon strength plus 10%, and the ability Sword of Torgod, which gives base weapon strength plus 90%, which would be good until you get on a Mammoth, but because the Mammoth has majority armor-piercing damage, you're not going to really increase its damage by all that much when you're on a Mammoth, and that is obviously his best mount. Then if we have a look at his faction effects, the Gift of Tongues, pretty basic, but 15% reduced upkeep cost for Marauder units, faction-wide, and 15 extra melee attack for Mammoth units. So you don't have to put the Mammoths in Wulfrik's army specifically, but if you want to go with Marauders as an example, you can end up with really cheap Marauders. So in the early stages of the game, you're not going to be recruiting Mammoths anyway, but I guess it just depends on which way you want to go with it. Neither's wrong, but I've always found, in Warhammer 3 at least, that going full Marauders with the World Walkers is actually preferable to getting Mammoths, just because it's better to just roll around with large armies of very replaceable Marauders than having one army of Mammoths. I just find I get better results out of it, but it's entirely up to you. If you like Mammoths, you can totally do that. Overall, I think that Norska is in a pretty good state in Total War Warhammer 3 at the moment. Significantly easier than it was in Total War Warhammer 2, and I do enjoy this campaign, but I'll be honest with you, I actually prefer Throg in Total War Warhammer 3. I think his campaign mechanics are actually a little bit more interesting. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Wulfrik the Wanderer, whether you agree or disagree. Don't forget to check out Games Planet with the link in the description if you want to get yourself a $25 voucher. Appreciate you guys. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.